For almost all of human history, if you wanted something to move, you moved it. Or you found something alive that would move it for you. An ox, a horse, a river, the wind. That was the entire menu, and it came with a hard ceiling. A strong horse can do about 1 horsepower. That's it. That word in your car's spec sheet, it's not a metaphor, it's literally 1 horse. So for thousands of years, the fastest we ever went, the most we could ever lift, was capped by muscle and weather. Then, in a little over a century and a half, we went from 1 horse to 200 of them packed under a hood. From a single explosion nobody could control, to a controlled explosion firing dozens of times a second, quietly, all day, without blowing up in your face. This is the story of how we got that fire inside a box and put it to work, and of how the machine that lost the very first race came back to win the last one. Here's the thing muscle and wind could never solve. They're unreliable and they don't scale. A horse gets tired, the wind dies. A river only flows one direction, past one spot. If you wanted more power, you needed more animals, more land, more people, and every one of them needed feeding and rest. What humanity was really missing was a way to unlock the enormous energy hidden inside fuel. The fact that a lump of coal or a cup of oil holds staggeringly more punch than a muscle ever could, and to release it on demand, in one place, whenever you flipped a switch. Fire had that energy. We'd had fire for 1,000,000 years. The problem was, nobody could turn fire into push. Heat went up and out and warmed the room. Turning that heat into spinning wheels, that was the puzzle that would take us 3 centuries and a lot of exploded machines to crack. The first crack in the puzzle came from an unglamorous problem: flooded mines. Water kept seeping into coal and tin mines faster than horses could haul it out. So in 1712, an Englishman named Thomas Newcomen built a machine to pump it. The idea was gorgeous in its simplicity. Boil water into steam, let the steam fill a cylinder, then cool it suddenly. The steam collapses back into water, leaving a near vacuum, and the ordinary air pressure above shoves a piston down into the empty space. Push, reset, push, reset. For the first time in history, fire was doing the work of horses. Burning coal to move a piston, no muscle required. It was slow, it was thirsty, it wheezed like a giant iron lung. But it worked. The ceiling had cracked. Newcomen's engine had a flaw that made it a fuel hog. It heated and cooled the same cylinder on every single stroke, wasting most of its coal just reheating cold metal. Enter James Watt. In the 1760s and 70s, he added one brilliant fix: a separate chamber to do the cooling, so the main cylinder could stay hot and stop wasting fuel. Suddenly the steam engine was efficient enough to power not just pumps, but factories, looms, mills. The whole industrial revolution runs on this. And it's Watt who saddles us with the word forever. To sell his engines to mine owners who thought in horses, he measured how much a horse could haul and coined the unit horsepower, deliberately as a sales pitch. 200 years later, it's stamped on every car on Earth. So we had power at last. But the steam engine had a flaw baked into its very design, and it's the flaw that drives this whole story. The fire burns outside the cylinder. You need a separate firebox, a boiler, a huge tank of water, and time. Sometimes half an hour just to build up steam before you can move an inch. All of that is heavy, enormously heavy. Great for a factory that never moves or a locomotive on solid rails. But strap it to something small and personal, something that has to start instantly and go anywhere. Hopeless. And there was a darker flaw. A boiler is a bomb. Push the pressure too far and it lets go all at once. If we ever wanted a small, safe, instant engine, one you could sit on top of, the fire couldn't stay outside in a giant kettle. It had to move inside. Here's the leap. What if you didn't heat water in a kettle and pipe the steam over? What if you burned the fuel right inside the cylinder and let the explosion itself shove the piston? No boiler, no warm-up, no separate fire. The energy is released a hair's breadth from the thing it's pushing. This is internal combustion, and in 1876, a German engineer named Nikolaus Otto built the first version that really worked. A 4-step cycle, so good we still use it, almost unchanged, in nearly every gasoline car alive today. 150 years old, running under your hood right now. Let me show you the 4 steps, because once you see them, you can't unsee them. 4 strokes. Watch the piston. 1. Intake. The piston drops and sucks in a mist of air and fuel, like a syringe pulling back. 2. Compression. The piston rises and squeezes that mist into a tiny tense space, packing the energy tight. 3. The bang. A spark plug fires, the fuel explodes, and that blast slams the piston back down. This is the only step that makes power. Everything else is set up. 4. Exhaust. The piston rises again and pushes the burnt gas out the door, ready to start over. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. That's it. That's the engine. And here's the number that should stop you. When you put your foot down, each cylinder runs that entire 4-step cycle more than a dozen times a second. And across the whole engine, that's dozens of explosions every second, well over 1,000 a minute. Your engine is a controlled explosion happening faster than you can blink, for hours. And it does it so smoothly, you sip coffee while it happens. The Otto engine changed the world. Light, small, instant, powerful. In 1886, Benz bolted one to a 3-wheeled carriage and built what most people call the first true automobile. And here's the delicious part. It made less than 1 horsepower. The whole future of driving started out weaker than a single horse. But it was on notice. And, you knew there'd be a catch, this engine had its own weak spots. It runs on gasoline, which is volatile and, back then, was almost thrown away as a useless byproduct. It needs that spark plug firing at the perfect instant every time, or it stumbles. And a good chunk of the energy in the fuel gets wasted. A lot of the bang escapes as heat, not motion. Somewhere out there was a stubborn inventor, convinced he could build an engine that skipped the spark entirely, squeezed the air so hard it lit the fuel by itself, and wrung more work out of every drop. He was right, and it nearly killed him. The inventor was Rudolf Diesel, and his idea was almost violent in its simplicity. Skip the spark plug completely. Just take air and squeeze it, hard, far harder than the Otto engine ever did. And here's the physics. When you compress a gas, it heats up. Squeeze air enough, and it gets scorching, hundreds of degrees, hot enough that the instant you spray fuel into it, it detonates on its own. No spark required. The compression is the ignition. Diesel got a working engine running in the 1890s, and it nearly cost him his life. An early one exploded and put him in the hospital. But when it worked beautifully. Because squeezing that hard wrings more useful work out of every drop of fuel. A diesel is simply more efficient than a gasoline engine. It turns more of the fuel into motion and less into wasted heat. So now there were 2 great families of internal combustion, and they split the planet between them along one simple line. Gasoline engines are lighter, rev higher, and love to spin fast. Perfect for something quick and nimble, so they went into cars and motorcycles. Diesels are heavier and tougher, but sip fuel and pull like an ox at low speed. So they went into the things that move the world. Trucks, trains, ships, tractors, generators. Almost everything in the global supply chain, every container ship crossing an ocean, every big rig on the motorway, still runs on Rudolf Diesel's stubborn idea. 2 answers to the same question. Burn fuel inside a cylinder, living side by side for over a century. And you'd think, with 2 winners this good, the story would be over. It wasn't, because a few inventors thought the piston itself, that up-down, stop-start hammering, was the real problem. Think about it. A piston is madness. It flies up, slams to a dead stop, reverses, flies back down, stops again, thousands of times a minute, and all that violent back and forth has to be converted into smooth spinning anyway. So what if you skipped it? In the 1950s, a German engineer named Felix Wankel built an engine with no pistons at all. Instead, a curved triangular rotor spins in a specially shaped chamber, and as it turns, it naturally creates the same 4 steps: intake, squeeze, bang, exhaust, but in a smooth, continuous whirl. It was smaller, lighter, and eerily smooth. It had almost no parts. Mazda fell in love with it and put it in real cars for decades. On paper, it was the future. So why isn't your car spinning a rotor right now? Because smoother on paper isn't the same as better in the real world. The Wankel had 2 flaws it could never fully beat. Sealing the tips of that spinning triangle was fiendishly hard, so it wore out and burned oil. And it was thirsty, guzzling more fuel for the power it made, which became a death sentence as fuel got expensive and emissions rules got strict. There was an even wilder detour. In the 1960s, Chrysler built cars powered by gas turbines, essentially a jet engine in your driveway. It could run on almost any fuel and sang like a jet. It also ran blisteringly hot, lagged when you hit the pedal, and drank fuel. Both ideas were brilliant, both lost, and the lesson is one engineers relearn constantly. The best technology doesn't win. The one that's good enough, cheap enough, and reliable enough wins. The humble piston was all 3. But there's one contender we skipped, and here's the twist. It was in the race from the very beginning. It just lost the first lap. Everything we've talked about burns fuel, but there's a completely different way to make motion: electricity. And here's the part that surprises everyone. The electric motor is older than the gasoline engine. Working electric motors existed in the 1830s, decades before Otto's 4-stroke. And around the year 1900, electric cars weren't a fringe curiosity. They outsold gasoline cars. Nearly 4 in every 10 cars sold in America were electric. Clean, silent, and simple to drive at a time when gasoline cars had to be hand-cranked and belched smoke. For a brief moment, the future looked electric. Then it all collapsed, because someone found a lot of very cheap oil. Gasoline cars got a self-starter, so you didn't have to crank them. And above all, a tank of gas held far more range than any battery of the day, and refilled in minutes. The electric car didn't lose because it was worse. It lost because the battery wasn't ready. So it went to sleep for 100 years. So what changed? The battery finally grew up. Modern batteries hold enough energy to go hundreds of miles, and once you have that, the electric motor's built-in advantages come roaring back. And they're brutal. A gasoline engine has hundreds of moving parts, all hammering and spinning, and it makes almost no twist at low speed, which is why it needs a gearbox. An electric motor has, essentially, one moving part. It's nearly silent, and it delivers its full turning force, its full torque, the instant it starts to spin, from a dead stop. That's why a family EV can out-accelerate a supercar off the line. No revving, no gears, no waiting for an explosion, just instant, total shove. The machine that lost the very first race because its battery was too weak came back a century later and beat the engine at the one thing engines were supposed to own: raw, instant power. So look how far we came. We started pinned at one horse, capped by muscle and wind for thousands of years. We put fire in a giant kettle and cracked the ceiling, but it was too big to move. We shoved the fire inside a cylinder, gave it 4 steps and a spark, and put 200 horses under a hood. We taught a stubborn version to skip the spark, and it went on to move the entire world's cargo. We tried spinning it and jet powering it, and learned that good enough beats brilliant. And the quiet contender that lost the very first lap, the electric motor, waiting 100 years for its battery, came back to win the last one. Every one of these was somebody staring at fire, or a spark, or a spinning wheel, and asking the same question: how do I turn this into push? If watching that explosion finally makes sense, scratched an itch you didn't know you had, you're in the right place. This whole channel is Pip and me decoding how the world actually works, one thing at a time. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Next in this series, we go from the engine to the whole machine. How the car itself evolved from a horseless carriage into the thing in your driveway. It's on the card on screen, and tell me down in the comments, what do you want us to decode next? A jet engine? Your own heartbeat? A black hole? You name it, we'll put